I knew something was off the second I saw the HOA president, Zelda Oakley, standing in my driveway at 7 in the morning, clipboard in hand, lips pursed like she'd just smelled a fart only she could detect. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee, wearing sweatpants and a faded, support your local mechanic t-shirt, and already I knew my day was about to go sideways. "Mr. Dax Zimmerman," she said, like she was announcing my name at a sentencing. "We need to talk about your garage." I leaned against the doorframe, took a long sip of coffee, and stared. "Do we?" She clicked her pen like a loaded gun. "The HOA has voted to temporarily reassign your garage space as a community storage area for the maintenance committee, effective immediately." I laughed. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. "You're serious?" I said, lowering the mug. "You want to use my private garage for HOA junk?" "It's not junk," she snapped. "It's official HOA property tools, signage, and seasonal decorations. You're the only homeowner on this side of the street with a garage that meets the square footage requirement with an accessible rear entrance. It's a practical choice. Zelda, it's my garage. I own it. It's on my deed." She sniffed. "That's a matter of interpretation. The HOA bylaws allow for temporary easements in support of community function. Section 8, subsection B. I read the bylaws," I said. "That section refers to shared property, not private." "Then I suggest you review the updated addendum filed last month," she said with a smug little tilt of her chin. "It passed with a majority vote at the emergency board meeting, which I wasn't notified about." She didn't deny it. It was a closed session. Board members only. I stepped out onto the driveway. "Zelda, I'm not giving you my garage. End of discussion." 2 days later, I came home from a 12-hour shift at the auto shop to find a combination lock installed on my garage door. My own damn garage. There was a sign taped to it. HOA access only. Violators subject to fines. I nearly put my fist through the drywall. I called every board member. Voicemail. Emailed. No response. I texted Zelda. She replied with a photo of the bylaws and the words, "This decision is final." That night, I climbed in through the back window of my garage, the one they'd stupidly left unlatched, and found my tools shoved into a corner like trash. In their place were folding tables, a giant inflatable snowman, stacks of paper flyers, and several plastic bins labeled HOA records. I took photos of everything. Every bin, every label, every violation. I knew I was going to war. First, I made copies of my property deed and cross-referenced the HOA's charter with the county clerk's office. Turns out the updated addendum was never filed with the city. Legally, it didn't exist. Then I found the kicker: the bylaws allowed for easements only on common property, not private lots. Zelda had counted on no one reading the fine print. She was wrong. I filed for a court injunction the next morning. The clerk raised an eyebrow when I showed him the photos, but once he saw the deed and the HOA's fake addendum, he stamped the paperwork and said, "They're gonna hate you for this." "Good," I said. "Let 'em." Within 72 hours, a judge signed the emergency injunction. The order was clear: immediate removal of all HOA materials from my property, a cease and desist against further trespassing, and a temporary freeze on HOA discretionary funds pending investigation. That wasn't even the best part. See, when I'd found all those bins marked HOA records, I'd taken a closer look. Inside were receipts, checks, and contracts, half of which were made out to a company called Oakley Community Solutions, LLC. A little digging showed it was registered to Zelda Oakley's niece. They'd been funneling HOA money into fake maintenance projects and pocketing the difference. I handed the evidence straight to the city auditor. But Zelda? She didn't go down easy. The day after the injunction was enforced, she showed up at my doorstep with 2 board members in tow and a stack of papers. "You've caused a legal disaster," she hissed. "This is harassment. You'll be fined." "No, Zelda," I said, holding up the court order. "This is justice." "And you? You committed fraud. Don't worry. The city will be calling." "You had no right to go through those records," she barked. "In my garage?" I said. "That you broke into? That you locked me out of?" "Yeah, I did." She stormed off, but I wasn't done. Not even close. With the injunction in place and the HOA funds frozen, the court assigned a temporary receiver to oversee their assets. Turns out the HOA owned a shed, a trailer, and a community golf cart, all of which were listed under the same discretionary fund Zelda had been abusing. I filed a motion to sell the assets to recoup legal fees and damages since I'd had to take time off work, pay court costs, and repair damages they caused in my garage. The court approved it. 1 week later, I watched from my porch as a tow truck hauled away the golf cart. The shed and trailer were picked up the next day. All of it sold at public auction. Zelda's expression when she saw the for sale signs on her precious equipment, worth every minute of courtroom paperwork. And the best part? I wasn't even done with her yet. The morning after the golf cart was hauled away, I walked out to my driveway with a mug of black coffee and a clearer head than I'd had in weeks. The silence was almost suspicious. No passive-aggressive flyers taped to my door. No clipboard-bearing patrols sniffing around the mailbox. I half expected Zelda to pop out from behind a hedge with a megaphone screaming about emergency community safety violations. Instead, I found a city code enforcement officer standing at the edge of my lawn, flipping through a manila folder. He looked up as I approached, eyes scanning my face like he was trying to place me. "You're Dax Zimmerman?" I nodded. "That's me. You with the auditor's office." "Related," he said, closing the folder. "Building Standards Division. Got a call about unauthorized structures on HOA property. We were told you might have information." I motioned him toward the sidewalk and pointed across the street to the small park area the HOA had been renovating for the past year. It had started as a plan to landscape a few benches and install a water fountain. Now it looked like a half-finished storage yard, a chain-link enclosure, several tarped-over pallets, and a cement slab with no permit markers anywhere in sight. They called it a community beautification project, I said, but no one ever voted on it. That slab went up overnight. He scribbled something down and snapped photos before turning to me again. "You know if they filed any development applications for this?" "Not a single one." "And those pallets?" "They used HOA funds for playground equipment. Looks more like leftover building supplies to me." He raised an eyebrow. "Mind if I take a closer look?" "Be my guest," I said. "Just watch your step. There's a trench over there they tried to cover with plywood." He disappeared behind the fencing and I went back inside. As soon as the door shut behind me, my phone rang. Unknown number. I usually let those go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "Zimmerman speaking. This is Carla Denton. I live on Windmere Court 3 blocks over. We heard about what happened with the garage. Is it true you got a court order against the HOA?" "Sure did." "Why?" There was a pause, then a quiet sigh like someone deciding to finally open a long sealed envelope. "Then maybe you can help us. They've been billing us for landscaping charges we never approved. We've tried talking to the board, but they say it's part of mandatory beautification compliance. Last month, they fined us because our rose bushes were too dense." "Too dense?" I repeated. "They claimed it attracted rodents. But only after we refused to sign over our side easement for their irrigation project." I closed my eyes and leaned against the counter. "Send me copies of everything. Billing statements, notices, any emails. I'll look through it." Over the next 48 hours, I received 11 more calls just like Carla's. Some from neighbors I knew by name, others from people I'd never spoken to. All of them had stories. Unauthorized charges, backdated fines, threats of liens. One guy had been told he owed $200 for excessive porch clutter. He lived alone and didn't even own patio furniture. Zelda had been running the HOA like a personal fiefdom, and no one had thought to challenge her until now. I started compiling a dossier, not just on the financial fraud, but on the procedural violations too. I requested public records of every permit the HOA had pulled in the last 2 years. Half of them were never filed. The others were issued under a shell LLC registered to a P.O. box in another county. That same LLC had received over $40,000 in consulting fees from the HOA's discretionary account, money I now knew had never been audited. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. She'd been using her position to hand out maintenance contracts to friends, approve personal reimbursements, and issue fines selectively to those who didn't vote her way. But the real twist came when I traced one of the vendors listed on a payment invoice as Glenwood Services LLC. A quick search showed it didn't exist. But a Glenwood Pierce did, her brother-in-law. Former contractor. License revoked for fraud. I made copies of every document, highlighted the connections, and sent the whole folder to the district attorney's public integrity unit. That same evening, I stood at the back of a packed meeting in the community hall. It was the first open session since the injunction, and word had clearly spread. People who hadn't been to an HOA meeting in years were suddenly sitting in plastic chairs with arms crossed and eyes narrowed. Zelda sat at the front table, flanked by her dwindling board allies, flipping through a folder like she wasn't about to get roasted alive. She tapped her microphone. "Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that disruptive behavior will not be tolerated. This is a formal meeting. You're lucky we're not bringing torches," someone muttered behind me. Zelda cleared her throat. "As you all know, recent events have caused confusion due to misinterpretations of our community bylaws. I want to assure you." "No," I said, stepping forward. "We're done letting you talk in circles." She froze, microphone still in hand. "I've submitted a formal petition to the city to begin the process of dissolving the current HOA board," I said. "Signed by over 2/3 of homeowners." Gasps rippled through the room. Zelda's mouth parted, but no sound came out. "And before you challenged the numbers, we double-checked every parcel and cross-verified signatures. You can't stall this one." She slammed the folder shut. "You don't have the authority. That process has to go through the board." "Not when the board's under investigation," I said. "As of this morning, the city opened a preliminary fraud probe into the HOA's financials." "That includes you, Zelda." A woman in the front row stood up. "Is it true you hired your niece's company for 3 different emergency repairs and never posted bids?" Zelda stood, voice rising. "That was approved under executive discretion." "You don't have that power without a full board vote," I cut in. "And we have the minutes from those meetings." "You never held one." Another board member, a wiry guy named Cliff who usually stayed silent, pushed his chair back and stood. "This is getting out of hand," he said quickly. "We were told everything was above board. If there's been misconduct, the rest of us weren't informed." "Then maybe you should have read the financial reports," said a man near the back. "Oh wait, you never published them." The room erupted into overlapping voices. Zelda banged the gavel like it owed her something. "Order. This is still my meeting." "Not anymore," I said. "We've submitted a motion of no confidence. And with a quorum present, the community has the right to vote on temporary suspension of the board pending investigation." "You can't do that," she hissed. "We just did. The vote wasn't even close. Zelda and her allies were suspended by majority vote pending audit results. A temporary oversight committee was appointed on the spot made up of volunteers from across the neighborhood, including 2 retired attorneys, a high school civics teacher, and a no-nonsense retired Marine who'd once built housing logistics for FEMA. As people filed out, I caught Zelda packing her briefcase, her hands trembling slightly. "You think you've won," she said without looking at me. "I didn't do this to win," I said. "I did it because you forgot who this community belongs to. We're not your subjects." She didn't respond. Just walked out with her head low, the crowd parting around her like she carried a contagion. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter. Neighbors who'd once never made eye contact were now talking in small clusters, laughing, comparing stories. A woman handed me a plate of cookies. A kid gave me a thumbs up. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was just fighting to keep my garage. I was fighting to give the neighborhood back to its people. The oversight committee wasted no time. Within a week, they'd secured the HOA's financial records, keys to the community office, and access to the electronic payment system. What they found was worse than any of us expected. Entire categories of expenses had been misclassified, labeled as community improvements, when they were actually reimbursements for catered lunches, hotel stays, and gasoline charges from weeks when no official business had taken place. Receipts were missing. Bank statements showed dozens of cash withdrawals, all in round figures. But the real bombshell came from the committee's newly appointed treasurer, a retired forensic accountant named Dolores Mendez. She was the type who carried a laser pointer everywhere, even when she wasn't using a slideshow. The kind of woman who didn't tolerate guesswork. "There's a pattern here," she said during the first community update meeting, pointing to a projected spreadsheet in the hall. "Every large expense over $5,000 is followed within 72 hours by a personal deposit into one of 2 local bank accounts. We've confirmed both belong to Zelda's relatives." The room was absolutely still. She clicked again, and the next slide showed a pie chart with nearly 60% of HOA expenditures flagged as non-compliant or unverified. "We're looking at coordinated embezzlement," she said, "and possibly tax fraud. I've already submitted my findings to the state attorney." The committee put a freeze on all new spending and requested a full audit from the state's Department of Consumer Affairs. That process would take months, but no one in the neighborhood was willing to wait that long to start undoing the damage. A week later, I was on a ladder replacing the warped trim around my kitchen window when I noticed 3 people standing in front of my driveway. Carla from Windmere Court, a woman named Doreen who ran the community newsletter, and a wiry, gray-bearded man I hadn't met before. "You're Zimmerman?" the man said. "Name's Ray. I manage the small business co-op over on Concord Boulevard. Heard you gave our illustrious HOA a black eye." I climbed down and shook his hand. "We're organizing a neighborhood legal defense pool," he said. "Something people can contribute to voluntarily in case this thing drags out in court. Folks are nervous. They want protection." "Good idea," I said. "But you're gonna need structure. And transparency. That's exactly why we want your help." I didn't want to become the face of a movement. I had a job, a house to maintain, and frankly, I hadn't asked to be anyone's hero. But I also couldn't pretend that everything was fixed just because Zelda had been ousted. "All right," I said, "but I don't make speeches and I don't run meetings. You want my help?" "It's behind the scenes." "Perfect," Carla said. "We've got plenty of people who love speeches. What we need is someone who knows how to keep the wolves out." By the end of the week, the Legal Defense Fund had over 70 contributors and a dedicated account managed by 2 CPA-certified residents. The co-op printed flyers about homeowners' rights and distributed them door to door. A dozen volunteers offered to walk elderly residents through the process of checking their property lines, utility rights of way, and past HOA correspondence. We weren't just reacting anymore. We were building something. Then the letters started arriving. Not from the HOA this time, but from Zelda's attorney. The first was addressed to the Oversight Committee, claiming wrongful suspension, defamation, and unlawful seizure of personal property. The second came to me directly, accusing me of inciting rebellion, trespassing, and unlawful surveillance for the photos I'd taken in my own garage. I sat down with Dolores and the committee chair, a soft-spoken librarian named Malik who had a memory like a microchip and a binder full of case law. "She's bluffing," Malik said, flipping through the letter. "There's no standing. She's trying to intimidate you. She's trying to scare all of us," Dolores added. "To slow things down. Then we speed up," I said. We scheduled a public forum for the following weekend. No official votes, just an open mic. A space for people to speak without fear. I expected maybe 20 people to show. We got over 100. An elderly man stood up and described how the HOA had fined him for unauthorized roofing materials after his son helped him patch a leak with matching shingles from a different supplier. A single mother described her struggle to get approval for a wheelchair ramp for her son denied 3 times for aesthetic inconsistency. One man admitted he'd been paying fines he didn't owe for years because he didn't know how to contest them. By the time the sun set, people had stopped looking over their shoulders. They were facing forward. The next day, I got a knock at the door. It was Cliff, the former board member who distanced himself from Zelda at the meeting. "I need to come clean," he said. "There's something you haven't seen." He handed me a flash drive. "It's all the board meeting recordings. The ones we weren't supposed to release. Zelda made us erase them after uploading minutes, but I kept copies." "What's on them?" "Proof she orchestrated the fake votes. She used proxies signed under false pretenses. And there's audio of her bragging about using HOA fines to pressure homeowners into selling low. Said she had buyers lined up." I stared at him. "Why are you bringing this to me now?" "Because I thought I could just wash my hands of it. But I can't. Not after that forum. Not after seeing how many people she hurt." The recordings were devastating. Not only did they confirm the proxy fraud, but they also revealed Zelda discussing plans to rezone a section of the neighborhood for commercial use, something that would have required unanimous consent under the HOA charter. She planned to push out resistant homeowners through a combination of fines, legal threats, and intentional code violations. I turned the recordings over to the state investigator already handling the case. They were accepted as supplementary evidence in the ongoing fraud probe. Zelda's attorney went silent after that. In the meantime, the Oversight Committee began drafting new community guidelines. Simple, clear, and fair. No more vague language about neighborhood harmony or aesthetic violations. Every rule had to be tied to a safety concern or documented community vote. We held elections for a permanent board 2 months later. This time, the ballots were counted in public with observers and printed tallies. No proxies. No closed sessions. Malik was elected president. Dolores took treasurer. Carla became secretary. I declined every nomination and instead offered to serve on the compliance subcommittee strictly in an advisory role. At the first official meeting of the new board, Zelda's name came up only once when Dolores motioned to ban her and any former executive board members found guilty of misconduct from holding HOA office again. It passed unanimously. The garage? It's mine again. Cleaned out, reorganized, and finally quiet. Every tool back in its place. Every bolt and screw where it belongs. But more importantly, the neighborhood is mine again too. Not just mine, ours. The people who live here, who built lives here, who now know they have a voice. I still get suspicious when I see a clipboard. But I also see kids playing in the park now, elderly neighbors walking without fear of phantom fines, and a bulletin board filled with community events instead of passive-aggressive warnings. We didn't just take back our homes. We took back our power. Fall came early that year. The trees lining the neighborhood turned gold and deep auburn, shedding their leaves in thick layers that crackled underfoot. For the first time in years, no one received a fine for excessive seasonal debris. The new board had voted to eliminate leaf-related citations altogether, and residents took great pleasure raking their yards at their own pace, chatting across property lines, and helping the older folks clear their gutters without fear of bureaucratic consequences. I was under my truck, tightening a stubborn bolt on the oil pan when I heard a voice above me. Hope that's a personal vehicle and not a commercial one, neighbor. I slid out from under the truck, squinting into the sunlight. A tall man in a navy pea coat with a clipboard tucked beneath one arm stood at the edge of my driveway. He had silver-rimmed glasses and the kind of posture that practically screamed, "I tell other people what to do for a living." "You must be new," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "I'm Derek Holloway. Just moved in on the corner lot across from the old community office." "I was told you're the guy who took down the last board." His tone was light, but his eyes were already cataloging my garage, the open toolbox, and the hydraulic jack with a kind of polished scrutiny I didn't like. "I'm the guy who made sure people could work on their trucks without being fined for it," I said. He nodded slowly. "I'm an attorney, actually. HOA law mostly. I've worked with several boards across the state. Helped standardize enforcement procedures, restructured voting frameworks, that kind of thing." "Sounds like a busy life," I said, not offering my hand. "I've been reviewing the new charter your oversight committee drafted. Interesting revisions. Very homeowner-centric. Almost populist. It was written by the people who live here. Still," he said, "some of the language could expose the community to liability. Removing enforcement capabilities entirely? That's risky." I set the rag down and stood fully. "We didn't remove enforcement. We redirected it. No more weaponized fines. If someone's a genuine danger to the community, we handle it through mediation or, if needed, city code enforcement." He adjusted his glasses. "You might want to watch how far you swing the pendulum. Communities need structure. We've got structure. What we don't have is a power-hungry board that answers to no one." He gave a courteous nod and walked off, but I kept my eye on that corner lot for the rest of the week. And I wasn't wrong to. By the next board meeting, Derek had submitted a proposal to amend the charter. He wanted to restore basic enforcement capabilities under what he called a Neighborhood Standards Committee. It looked harmless on the surface, just a 5-person panel with term limits and oversight, but buried in the fine print was a clause that would allow the committee to issue citations, collect fines, and bypass majority homeowner approval for urgent compliance matters. Malik read through it twice before setting it on the table and leaning back. "This reads like a backdoor to reinstating the old framework." "It's just a tool," Derek said. "It gives the board the flexibility to respond quickly to real issues. You're still protected by the checks and balances we've put in place." Carla folded her arms. "How is it balanced if the committee can fine people without a homeowner vote? It's limited to safety and aesthetic violations." Dolores didn't even look up from the paperwork. "Define aesthetic." Derek took a breath that was just a little too patient. "We can't legislate every eventuality. Some things require discretion." "No," I said. "That's exactly what we're avoiding." Vague discretion is how the last board terrorized people. He turned toward me, measured. And you think a community with no discretion at all can function? What happens when someone paints their house neon green and installs a 10-foot chicken in their front yard? Then we talk to them. Like neighbors. Not overlords. The proposal was rejected unanimously. Derek didn't argue. He just packed up his folder, thanked everyone for their time, and left. 3 days later, half the neighborhood received anonymous mailers. Glossy, professional-looking pamphlets that claimed the new board was jeopardizing property values, enabling non-compliant behavior, and eroding community standards. The return address was a P.O. box in a nearby city. The bottom corner bore a logo, HOA Residential Strategies. I called a meeting at my place that Friday. It wasn't official. Just coffee, folding chairs, and a whiteboard. Dolores brought her laptop. Malik brought a folder of housing code references. Ray showed up with a stack of flyers he'd collected from various porches. Looks like he's running a shadow campaign, Ray said, thumbing through them. This one even has a mock ballot for reinstating enforcement authority. He's trying to get a petition going, Dolores said. If he gets enough signatures, he can call for a special vote to amend the charter. He won't get the numbers, Carla said. Not after everything we've been through. I looked at the flyers again. The language was careful, calculated to sound reasonable. No mention of fines. No mention of disciplinary actions. Just restoring order, protecting investments, and ensuring continuity. He's not going after the people who came to the forums, I said. He's targeting the quiet ones. The folks who didn't speak up last time. The ones who just want a peaceful life and assume someone else is watching the henhouse. We need to talk to them, Malik said, face to face. So we did. Over the next 2 weeks, we split into pairs and visited every house that hadn't attended the forums or voted in the last election. We didn't preach. We asked questions. How did they feel about the changes? Did they feel safer? More respected? Were there things we could improve? Some were skeptical. A few had been swayed by Derek's mailers, but most appreciated being asked. No one had ever knocked on their door just to listen before. By the time Derek rolled out his petition, it fizzled. He barely cleared a third of the required support. Dolores double-checked every signature. 3 were from properties that had changed ownership, and 2 belonged to addresses that didn't exist. At the next meeting, he didn't show. His lights stayed off for days. Some said he'd moved out. Others said he was laying low. I didn't care either way. What mattered was that the neighborhood had passed another test. This time, it hadn't needed a court order or an injunction. Just people paying attention. A few weeks later, I was back in my garage, rewiring a work light over the tool bench, when a knock sounded at the open side door. It was the teenage kid from down the street, Logan. He'd helped pass out flyers during the legal defense fundraiser, but we hadn't talked much since. Hey, he said, my car's making this weird grinding sound. I was wondering if you could take a look. I set the screwdriver down and motioned him in. Pop the hood. He stepped inside, looking around. This is a cool setup. Way better than those pop-up garages people rent downtown. Built it myself, I said. Kept it running during a war. He grinned. My mom said you made the HOA sell their golf cart. Your mom's not wrong. He watched quietly as I checked the belts and tested the tension on the pulley. I could see the questions building. Why'd you do it? He asked finally. Could have just paid the fine and moved on. I straightened, rubbing my hands on a towel. Because if someone walks into your house and tells you they own your kitchen, and you let them, then one day they'll tell you they own your living room too. And pretty soon, you're just a guest in your own home. He nodded slowly, like he hadn't thought of it that way. You want to help people? I asked. Start by paying attention. Don't wait for someone else to fix things. Most of the time, they're waiting for you. He smiled and offered a handshake. Thanks, Mr. Zimmerman. I shook it. Bring your car by tomorrow. We'll get under it and figure out that sound. You ever done a brake job? No. You will. After he left, I stood in the garage a moment longer. The walls were lined with tools, the floor clean, the air quiet except for the slow hum of the work light overhead. It wasn't just a garage anymore. It was proof. that you could be outnumbered, outmaneuvered, even blindsided, but if you stood your ground with the truth in one hand and the law in the other, you could win. Not just for yourself, but for every neighbor who thought they were alone. Zelda had tried to turn the neighborhood into her kingdom. Derek had tried to sell it back to the highest bidder. But we'd taken it back, and this time we were going to keep it.